No mai, haere mai, piki mai, kakia mai, kia ora and welcome to 30 with Guyon Espiner. 30 minutes, one guest, no cuts. What we record is what you get. Well, just a few years back, ex-David Seymour led a party of one. Now he's one of New Zealand's most powerful, influential and controversial politicians, and he's destined to be Deputy Prime Minister next year. ACT aims to continue the unfinished business of right-wing economic reforms started in the mid-1980s by Sir Roger Douglas, one of the founders of the party. But is David Seymour's agenda a recipe for increased prosperity or increased inequality? Let's start the clock. 30 minutes with David Seymour. Kia ora, Minister. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Oh, no, kia ora. Pleasure to be here.
You've been in Parliament nearly 10 years now, and you're finally in Cabinet. What has surprised you about being at the decision-making table?
Look, I think it's extremely collegial. I've always seen politics as a very hot contest, but I think for a couple of reasons. One is that you've got three parties that want this government to be a success. Their success is tied to the success of the government. But putting aside the politics, I think there's also the fact that people know that we're in one of those periods which is make or break for New Zealand. There's two big challenges that are related, I think. One is the sense of purpose that perhaps we'd like to think we used to have. We don't have that sort of shared sense of purpose. The thing that people talk about is division and lack of trust in institutions that they don't trust as much. There's been a lot of talk around the media, but I don't think it's just the media. It's also government. It's almost everybody, really. People don't trust each other as much. And second of all, I think related to that is the lack of social mobility. So, once upon a time, the incentive to, go to school, work hard, get a job, save some money, put it aside, maybe invest it carefully, and buy a house. Well, there's now a whole generation of people saying, well, hang on, I did all that stuff up to a point, but now I'm coming out as a graduate, I might be earning $50,000, I might have a student loan that's pretty close to that, and for anything that looks vaguely like a house my parents had, I'm looking at $1 million, I've got to save 4 times my income for a deposit. And then interest rates are 7%. So, we know we're in a time when cohesion, social mobility are really in trouble, and we have to work through an agenda to get back both of those things.
How good is the advice you get from the public service? How do you rate the quality of the public service?
Extremely variable. So there are people in there who are, first of all, very capable, and second of all, extremely committed. So on some areas, I don't want to go into which ones, but in some areas I've been blown away by the quality of the advice, the thinking that we've had.
And but?
In other areas, I think it's fair to say that we've had to basically do the job with our relatively small team of half a dozen people working in my actual office in the Beehive. We've had to substitute for where we haven't really seen the quality of advice coming through, and it's been faster to do it ourselves. So it's variable.
And it's getting smaller, isn't it? What are we up to now? Nearly 3,500 public servants' jobs have been killed. What's the good bit about cutting hundreds of jobs in education or oranga tamariki, the people who are supposed to care for the future of our children, for example?
Well, there's actually no good bit, but what would have been better is if the previous government had added 18,000 people to that number without actually getting the results. So if you look at, what's the end of the day, what are we here to do? Make sure that kids who are vulnerable in dangerous situations get put in a safer place so their basic needs are met. That hasn't been happening despite the expansion of people working there. And you can make the same argument across just about every area.
Well, departments are being asked for 6.5% to 7.5% cuts. Will that extend to ministers, ministerial services, the support, travel, expenses for ministers? Will that be shaved back 7%?
It depends what your baseline is. So there are some areas that actually aren't being asked to do 7.5%.
Yeah, but what about ministers' services?
Yeah. So,
will that be shaved back?
Well, the answer is no, and the reason is that the expansion hasn't happened over the last 6 years in that area. In fact, it's been almost static. And what I'd say to people is you've got a bunch of people that you can actually vote for and elect. If you want them to be in charge, then they do actually need...
But isn't it what's good for the goose is good for the gander? I mean, if you're cutting back those other departments 6.5%, 7.5%, albeit albeit not every one of them, but most of them,
Yeah.
then why shouldn't you take the hit too on your pay and perks and travel as
Because
well?
I think you've misinterpreted the principle here. The principle here is that we are reversing the expansion of government that was ineffective. Ministerial, parliamentary salaries, those have actually been static for 6 years. If you don't want politicians to be able to travel and go out and see the people they represent and be accountable to the people they represent, well, you could do that, but I don't think that would help.
Just to clarify, so that you're exempt,
No, we're not exempt from the principle.
but it ain't going to happen, is it?
No, the principle is where there's been significant expansion in government, we are reversing that to an extent. Where there hasn't been a significant expansion, we're saying, okay, maybe that's been necessary all along.
All right.
So we're applying the same principle to ministerial officers, to MPs and government departments. It's just the government departments are the ones that have grown.
Just to talk briefly about the relationships with the government, and you did talk about them a little bit before. Winston Peters, you were highly critical of him. You didn't trust him. He couldn't be worked with, etc. Okay, the deal's been done, but how is it working with him now? Have you had a whiskey with Winston Peters?
Well, I barely drink these days, so it probably wouldn't be that. I'm not sure of what he's up to in the coffee department, but certainly where we're at is that we've both got areas of responsibility. So he's responsible for foreign affairs.
Sure, we know that, but do you respect him now?
Look, I respect everybody at a basic level. I've never actually said that I didn't respect him. But obviously we have a totally different view when it comes to many issues and how politics should be done. And of course, in an election campaign, you put your best foot forward. It would be odd if you said, well, I think ACT's probably the best party, but those guys might be okay too.
Okay. What about Christopher Luxon? Does he have what it takes to be a great Prime Minister?
I think he absolutely does. I mean, Chris and I have known each other going back to about 2016 when we were neighbours. I think Chris has got a good skill set that allow him to bring together teams of people and create a platform environment where they can achieve. And Chris has done, I think, a good job so far at pulling together a coalition of three, as have the other two partners, because ultimately it's a three-way relationship.
Yeah. You're going to be Deputy Prime Minister halfway through this term. Why do you want that job?
It's really a matter of, well, this is a coalition and therefore you need to share power equally and therefore, it would be strange if you had a party that was the second biggest of the three parties that didn't occupy that position for at least some of it.
Did you want to go first?
To be honest, I didn't really give it a lot of thought. I don't think it makes a lot of difference either way. To be perfectly honest, people put a lot of emphasis on the Deputy Prime Minister, but that doesn't allow me to do anything more on red tape and regulation. That doesn't allow me to
Which
do more on
is why I
charter
asked you why you wanted the job, but you're basically saying it's because it's a power sharing scenario.
It is. Okay. It's about in Māori mana o rite, equal mana amongst the partners.
Okay, let's talk about ACT. You got 8.6% overall. I looked at how you fared in some of the lower income electorates, and the ACT support was tiny. So Māngere, 624 party votes out of nearly 30,000, so about 2%. Similar in Manurewa, you had 806 votes out of 30,000. Why don't poor people vote for ACT?
Well, first of all, as you can see, some do.
They're tiny, way below.
I'm sure that they're normal-sized people, actually. But the point is, why don't more people vote for ACT?
No, that's not my question. My question is, and I've demonstrated that the evidence is there, why don't poor people vote for ACT?
Well, actually, the evidence is that some do, but you're right, not as many as we'd like. And I'd like.
Why do you think that is?
I've been trying to answer that question for the last 30 seconds, Guy. 30 seconds of our 30 minutes. But the reason is that we are a party that campaigns on the idea of social mobility, that actually we need to do better in education. We need to make housing easier to build so it's more available. We believe that it's important that people can make a difference in their own lives. We're also competing against a lot of people in politics who come along and say, no, it's those rich people's fault. We'll just take the money off them and give it to you. Now, that's a much easier political message. we will give you this and we'll take it from them. Once you go out there and say, well, actually, we're going to create an environment of social mobility, we're going to deregulate the housing market, we're going to do better infrastructure funding and financing, we're going to devolve education so you're more likely to get an education that you would like. That's a much harder message than vote for us and you'll get this money. So I understand why it's a challenge, but nonetheless, social mobility, the ability to make a difference in your own life, that is the only way that you actually build real self-esteem.
Māori don't vote for ACT either in large numbers at all, do they? I mean, if you go to Ikaroa Rāwhiti, 209 party votes out of nearly 27,000, less than 1%. Similar in Te Taihoauru, 284 votes out of 28,000, just over 1%. Why don't Māori vote for ACT?
Well, again, actually they do.
In very tiny numbers, again.
So again, you seem to be defining Māori as people who have made the self-selecting choice to be on a Māori roll. That's only about half of Māori. We did an exit poll after the election, immediately after, and asked people who they voted for. We also asked them demographic questions. We asked, do you whakapapa Māori?
Yeah. And what did your numbers show?
Well, in our poll, it said 17% of people said they whakapapa Māori, so that's about right. And of those, 7% voted for ACT. So 8.6 across the New Zealand average, 7% Māori. You know all your time in political reporting that's well within the margin of error on that kind of number. Okay. So I think I hate to say it, but your basic facts are wrong. But what is interesting about what you're revealing to us is that people who self-select to go on the Māori role are quite different from people as a group that whakapapa Māori.
Okay. You've said that services should be based on need and not race. Let's go through a couple of examples. The MAPAS scheme, the Māori and Pacific Admission Scheme, it allocates about 30% of entries into med school to Māori and Pacifica.
Closer to 40, but yes.
Does that fit with your view of need, not race?
Well, I think the point is that we need to ask ourselves, after 25, 30 years, has that scheme actually had results for patients? Now, we know that people went through the scheme. We know that they became doctors. We don't know to what extent they're actually dealing with Māori and Pacific patients, and we don't know to what extent they're actually improving the outcomes for those patients. Now, that's the theory, right? You get more Māori and Pacific doctors, they'll tend to Māori and Pacific patients, and those patients will be better off. So in this government, ACT has negotiated that we're actually going to robustly ask those questions.
Do you support the scheme? The idea of the scheme?
No, I don't support racial discrimination.
Is that what you think MAPAS is?
Well, it's a scheme that says you qualify for this scheme if you're a certain race. So by definition, that's exactly what it is.
So are you pushing for it to go?
No, I'm pushing for the evidence to demonstrate that it's actually had a positive effect. So if you look at something like the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Equality, this is a big deal. A lot of people don't know. The New Zealand government has signed up for this. It says that you should never discriminate on the basis of race like that scheme does. If you do, it should only be a temporary measure to reduce inequality. So the question is this discrimination justified on those grounds? And that's what we'd like to find out.
And your answer is?
Well, my answer is nobody knows, but we keep doing it.
Well, your answer seems to be no, it's not.
My answer is that if the evidence shows it isn't, then we should stop discriminating. You should only discriminate on race.
Gotcha. What about
you have the evidence?
What about a scheme like bowel cancer screening? Because it's available to Māori and Pacific from the age of 50 in some areas, but 60 to others. Does this fit with the ACT worldview?
Well, again, we at the moment have a study of what causes morbidity or what makes people ill that is almost entirely a racial lens. Now, I think it would be better and more helpful to have a much richer appreciation of the data. I suspect that when it comes to the reasons people die earlier, some of it is to do with rural location. Some of it is to do with choices around lifestyle, eating, smoking, alcohol and so on. Some of it is to do with the quality of housing. And if we start looking at things like that, what we'll find is that there's some Māori people, I claim to be one of them, who don't have those problems doing quite well, thank you very much.
So do you think that should change and that we should have a level...
Well, just a second, this is supposed to be the big idea show. There are other people who are not Māori but do have those problems. So our point is, let's use good evidence and good data to target based on the needs people have, rather than lazily looking at everyone through the lens of race. We think that is wrong, and we think we can do better practically and have less division.
Okay. In the website that you've set up to promote or involve discussion about the Treaty Principles Bill, you say that ACT believes every child born in New Zealand deserves the same respect and dignity, including equality before the law. Are Māori currently equal before the law?
Well, they absolutely should be. I'm aware.
Are they?
Well, I'm aware that there are various statistics around the likelihood of being arrested, the likelihood of being prosecuted, and so on.
Yes.
Those are things that concern me as much as anybody.
Well, that's interesting, because I did want to go there, because they are, as you say, overrepresented at every stage of the criminal justice system. If you take a couple of examples, low-level drug crime or drug possession, 2017 figures these are, 7.3% of Māori convicted went to prison and just 2% of Pākehā. And it's similar if you look at assault numbers. So about twice as many Māori convicted are imprisoned than Pākehā. So would you agree that in the criminal justice system, Māori aren't equal before the law?
Well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, there is no law that says that someone should be treated differently based on their race, and there never should be when it comes to criminal justice. The application of the law, I think, is what you're talking about. You then need to ask yourself, why is this happening? Are there other variables that lead to more Māori being prosecuted or getting heavier sentences? Is it something to do with the nature of the sentencing? I think you have to understand all of that evidence, and that's what we're all about, is using good data and evidence to understand the real drivers, so we don't have to lazily categorise people by race.
I know, but you and I have agreed that Māori are disproportionately negatively impacted by the criminal justice system in the respect of, for the same crime, right? We've agreed on that.
Well, no, we haven't, because you're using categories of crime saying, well, assault in general, but it would be interesting to look at the nature of those assaults, the nature of the sentencing decisions. Now, I haven't done that, but just as with health, is there a difference between Māori and Pākehā life expectancy? Yes, there is. That is very easy for all to see. However, the real question is not, is there a difference? But what are the real causes of that difference? You might find causes that don't apply to all Māori and do apply to non-Māori or some non-Māori, and therefore you want to start addressing the causes so you can practically solve the problem rather than just dividing people.
Sure, but you said you were concerned about it in your initial answer, and in fact you volunteered it. Wouldn't you be better to address that than this rather more sort of esoteric Treaty Principles Bill? I mean, because people are so much more egregiously affected by having their liberty taken from them. You're a party of liberty. If you are locked up on the basis, really, when it comes back to it, to institutional racism, which is what the experts tell us, it's not me being woke or anything, this is what the experts are saying, wouldn't you be better to address that problem than go down the track of something a bit more sort of ephemeral like the Treaty Principles Bill?
Well, here's the flip side of the question. I'm sure you'll also agree that Māori are more likely to be a victim of many crimes. So if you're worried about the welfare of Māori, and I don't think it's healthy to group people racially, are you sure that being softer on crime or letting people off more often is going to help people as victims? Because you might find that there are people who are Māori who are victims of crime by other Māori who are saying, actually, no, we want you to be tougher. So I think you just got to sometimes drill down a little bit and ask yourself, what are we really trying to achieve here? Not just fewer people going to prison. Ultimately, we want people to be safe from violence.
You've mentioned this a couple of times, that you dislike people being categorised by race. I mean, are you saying that there is no Māori worldview or no te ao Māori, as people would call it? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, there most certainly is. But that doesn't mean that every person who whakapapas Māori subscribes to all of it. It also tends to evolve. If I'm also Scottish, but I don't have to, dance around in a kilt like I'm on the set of Braveheart. These things change, and in my view, te ao Māori starts with the individual, then you've got whānau, hapu, iwi, then te ao Māori, and tikanga is something that evolves over time in response to the wants and needs of individuals. What I don't like is the idea, and this came up in the end-of-life choice debate, people would say, oh, euthanasia is foreign to te ao Māori. And I remember a man who stood up at one of our public meetings who was actually an expert in tikanga, and he said, no, I'm sorry, actually burial tikanga or burial customs in the Māori world have evolved enormously, even in the 40 years of my life, and they will continue to evolve. Sure. So yes, I believe there's such a thing as te ao Māori, but I also believe that each of us have the right to self-determine and live on our own terms. Okay. It's not a straitjacket, it's something that evolves to serve us, as does every culture.
Let's switch tack and talk about the economy and tax. Can we afford tax cuts?
Well, I think the real question is...
No, that is the question.
Well,
I asked the questions. My question is, can we afford tax cuts?
Well, my question is, who's we?
New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Can New Zealand afford tax cuts?
Well, the answer is obviously yes, but here's a better question.
No. Let's answer that question because...
Well, I have. Now let me see. I said yes. Now, let me give you a better question. Can the Crown, can the government deliver the services that people expect and require while also taking less money in tax? The answer to that is unequivocally yes.
Yes, but
I would say
the problem is that you're going to have to borrow about 15 billion, which is about the same amount as the tax cuts. You are foregoing in revenue on that tax cuts. So you're effectively borrowing for tax cuts, aren't you?
Well, no. I mean, you could argue that it's not like $1 that's borrowed by the Debt Management Office gets tagged and then goes to a particular purpose.
No, but without the tax cuts, you wouldn't need to borrow 15 billion. True or false?
Sure, but without...
So is that true?
No, because it's just as valid to say that if we didn't have education, which is about 20 billion, or if we didn't have this or that.
Are you putting tax cuts on a par with the whole education budget?
Well, it's roughly a similar amount.
Yeah, but is it of similar importance?
Well, no, but...
No, so how's your analogy standing up?
Well, very simply, you could say that there are any number of activities that the government has, but we're putting together a budget overall that is going to return money that people would have paid in tax and allow them to keep it to deal with the significant challenges that everyone up and down this country is facing. I think we need a reality check here. There's so many people who are so focused on 3,500 job losses in the public sector. They ought to get out on the main streets of New Zealand. I was on Waiuku Main Street talking to the business owners, the people that run social provision, do family budgeting. The real estate agents tell me that people are selling their houses due to family breakup.
And how much money will those people get in their pay checks with your tax cuts?
Well, obviously,
roughly,
that it depends on how much they earn, but you're looking at $10 to $20 a week for the average earner.
And you're going to spend $15 billion on that?
Well, that's because there's 5.3 million people. I mean, you can.
So you're confident you've got your priorities right on that?
Well, we actually do, because our priority is allowing people who have battled pretty hard and had rising tax bills,
to get
along with everything
$20
else. Well, actually, to you it may not seem like a lot, but to a lot of people that means means a big difference.
Let's talk a bit more about tax. I mean, we had that 2022 report by the IRD, which basically said that a middle wealth New Zealander had an effective tax rate of about 20%, and the richest families in New Zealand, the 311 that they looked at, had a tax rate of about 10%. It was 9.4, but it was about half. Gee, I mean, IRD says it's our job to be fair. Why is it that the richest families in New Zealand are paying half the rate of tax as a middle income grunter?
Because it's a totally bogus study based on false premises, and let me explain how it works. That study looked at the paper gain in people's assets.
Yes, it was capital gains.
So in 2021, the average house in New Zealand went up $135,000. Now, if we took the IRD study seriously, then every New Zealander who owned a home would have had $135,000 of income that had to be taxed. For most people, that would be 33%, and everyone would have had a $45,000 tax bill just because their house went up in 2021.
Yes,
I understand
that, and you're right. It's largely because of capital gains.
If you think that's ridiculous, then I don't know why you're talking about this silly study.
Well, it was done by the IRD. I mean, it's not some dude down at the sort of petrol station.
It was done by the well. What's your problem with dudes at the petrol stations?
Well, they probably don't know as much about tax as the Inland Revenue.
Well, they know that they're paying it, and they know they're going to be glad that we've got a government that is finally allowing people to keep some more of their own money.
I guess
when it comes to this dude at the IRD, I mean, you have to actually recognise that the premise of that study was set up to get a certain result that nobody takes seriously, because if you take it seriously, you would have to tax every person on every paper profit. But people would have to pay tax on their KiwiSaver. If the value of your KiwiSaver went up a few percent, you'd pay tax on that.
What is so special about exempting capital from tax? Because I see it's even in your constitution. Capital should never be taxed.
That's right.
What is the inherent difference and fairness that my work at the factory or dude at the petrol station is taxed, but my capital gains on, say, investment property is not taxed? Why is that fair?
Well, first of all, it is taxed because you'll know that the value of a capital asset is the value of the revenue that it produces in future years. That revenue is taxed under an income tax system. So if you have a business, say Guyon sets up 30 Minutes with Guyon, it becomes a very valuable franchise all over the world, and you say, David, I want to sell it to you. I think you're going to get 100 million in revenue in the future, so I want $100 million for it. I'm going to turn around and say, sorry, mate, I'm going to pay 28% company tax on that. Therefore, I'm only prepared to pay you 72 million. So your $100 million of capital gain is 72 because I'm pricing in the tax I'll pay for owning your business in the future. So it is taxed. The second thing is we as a country are starved of capital. We don't have the investment. We can't afford the infrastructure. We're not investing enough in private capital in our businesses. That's lowering the productivity of the guy or girl in the factory who wants to get higher wages and afford the things they need for themselves and their family. Now, some people say, oh, we don't have enough capital, let's put a tax on that as well. I think that's completely nuts. We should be doing everything we can to attract more capital in this country. We already tax it through income tax, the way I just outlined.
Well, let's talk.
So why put another tax on it?
Let's talk a little bit about attracting capital, because you have some ministerial responsibility in the foreign investment area. I see in your constitution for the ACT Party, you say that foreign investment should be restricted only if an investment threatens national security. So you're good with foreigners owning anything in New Zealand except if it threatens national security?
Well, I don't really see what your objection is.
I haven't expressed an objection. I've asked you a question.
Yeah, well, then the answer is yes, but the challenge is back to people to explain why they object.
Okay, so you're good with foreign ownership of anything other than if it represents a national security problem?
Well, that's the role of government, is to protect us from threats.
So how's
outside.
it worked out with the, say, selling all our banks to Australia, for example?
Well, this is the problem, Guy, and you've got a real problem with pronouns, and I didn't expect this from you. I thought you'd be more sensitive. You said, can we afford tax cuts? We're selling all our banks. Actually,
I did not expect this interview
I
hadn't got pronouns on my question line anywhere.
I know, I'm very sensitive about use of pronouns. Now, you're saying our banks. Well, actually, we don't own them. Private companies and shareholders own them. And
how has it worked out for New Zealand having all the big four banks owned by Australia?
Well, how has
that worked out?
How is it worked out
well?
They're not owned by Australia. They're owned by certain shareholders of Australian companies, as well as a lot of New Zealand
And how do you
shareholders.
think that's worked out?
I think it's worked out actually extremely well. If you look at the if you look at the banking services that people get, the stability, the fact that through the GFC they came through, nobody had massive losses. Actually, the really big loss in the GFC was South Canterbury Finance. Now that was a major haircut for a lot of people, including the taxpayer that had to bail it out.
The Commerce Commission has just come out and said that there's no proper competition and that New Zealanders pay too much for things like mortgages and the things that really affect the so-called cost of living crisis. So what's the good bit?
That's a really interesting conversation, but see, you're focused on the citizenship of the investors. I'm focused on the regulation and the structure of the market. And yes, I do think that our financial sector is over-regulated. I think it's made it harder for newcomers to enter the market. But as you'll see just this week, this government has removed the triple CFA restrictions that make it will make it easier
to
for
lend,
people
to borrow money.
And easier for smaller competitors to enter. Because what you've got to remember is one of the biggest supporters of extra regulation is big business. If you're a big business, more regulations are a pain, but they're going to hurt and maybe wipe out your competitors and stop any upstarts coming and competing with you. So let's focus on the competition regulation. Let's focus on getting more competition.
Okay.
Let's not focus on someone's race or whether they're Australian or whatever.
Okay, or pronouns.
Pronouns. Well, no, let's get our pronouns right, because
okay.
this is about what does the New Zealand consumer get, not we or Australia.
Just a couple of minutes left till we hit the 30-minute mark. Your background in life has been politics, really, hasn't it? You were president of ACT on campus, you did think tanks in Canada and New Zealand, you did a stint as a ministerial advisor to John Banks. I mean, you're a career politician, really, aren't you?
I think that's probably a fair description, but ultimately, so what? I'm someone that has devoted most of their adult life, apart from a short stint as an electrical engineer, to actually getting good at what it is that we're trying to achieve through politics. How do we get better public policy? How do we ultimately allow people to live together peacefully and become more prosperous?
Can you envisage a life without politics?
Oh, very much so.
Who is David Seymour without the politics?
Look, I'm a New Zealander who wants to see a better future with more.
But you're
social...
talking like a politician.
Well, no, I actually am a politician, but I'm also a New Zealander who wants to see a better future for all people. And at various times, I think I've actually given up quite a lot in order to try and do that.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, I work a lot more hours and a lot more days of the week than any of my friends who went and did other things, and in most cases actually earn more money than I do. I actually have gone through, being the only person in a party entering Parliament alone. Now, people have told me no one's done that in 100 years. It was bloody tough, and for a long time, people wouldn't take me seriously. They questioned, you've got no right to be there, you won your seat, you're dodgy, blah, blah, blah. And actually, over time, I've been able to show people, no, what I'm trying to do is have honest conversations, stand up for the right principles when things are tough, and make New Zealand a better place through better public policy.
Well, thank you for your conversation today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much.
That was 30 Minutes with David Seymour. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time.